Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhaṃ Dhammāṃ Saṅghāṃ Namasami. Uyunjanti sati manto nanikete ramanti te hangsava palalang hitawa okamokang jahanti te. Today is the 26th of February 2022, and the Dhammapada verse I just recited, I'm not necessarily going to theme the talk around that, but I like it anyway. It's kind of got a nice ring to it, and it's very hard to translate. So I won't go into it right now. I'll just leave it as Pali. Maybe not explain what it is. But trying to think of, there's various Dhamma verses that were coming up in my mind, and thinking what would dovetail well with the winter retreat theme of the 4 guardian meditations, 4 protective meditations, and really all of the Dhamma, everything is contained, every theme of Dhamma contains every other theme of Dhamma. It's all the Buddha's teachings, and really it all comes down to cultivating wholesome qualities and relinquishing unwholesome qualities. And there's this phrase that comes up in the suttas, oh, how many wholesome qualities the Buddha's given us and how many unwholesome qualities he's rid us of. And there's all these lists in the suttas and things we can develop and cultivate, and we've been talking quite a bit about asubha kammatthana and death contemplation. So that's one angle to take at the practice, to cultivate wholesome qualities and brighten the mind. But there's also things like the subha dhammas, the qualities that beautify. So that's like kanti soracha, the patient endurance and humbleness, humility. Those are qualities that beautify a practitioner. Or there's just the 7 factors of awakening, or any other Dhamma qualities that we can be cultivating, things like energy and generosity. Mindfulness is always helpful to be cultivating. And keeping in mind that we have a precious opportunity, the precious human rebirth, the optimum human rebirth. It's the best possible opportunity for Dhamma practice, and also that having gained this rebirth, there's not that much time to practice. Say Shay is 6 now, what's he going to be like when he's 26, 36, 46? If he was 46, he'd be older than me, but I'm only 41. Well, there's not much time. It happens, it all goes by very quickly. There's not much time. There's verses from Lama Tsongkhapa, Great Stages of the Path, that I quite like. I've pretty much memorized these particular verses. It goes something like, this precious human rebirth is worth more than a wish-granting gem. You only gain its like the once. So hard to get, so easily destroyed. It's like a lightning bolt in the sky. Contemplate this, and you will realize all worldly actions are but winnowed chaff, and day and night you must extract some essence from your life. I, the yogi, practiced this way. You, wanting liberation, do the same. And we can take verses like that and inspire ourselves with, and get ourselves to do more in terms of cultivating wholesome qualities and relinquishing unwholesome qualities. And the verse in the verse I chanted in Pali in the beginning, it is very hard to translate, but it's something like those who are mindful, those who are mindful are free to fly away. They aren't attached or bound by to any home, to any abode, like wild geese taking flight from their lake, home after home they leave behind. So that's both a verse about bhikkhus, or the Tudong spirit of being able to leave place after place behind, or that wherever we are is our home. But it's also about birth and death, that home after home, body after body, we leave behind in samsara, and it just goes on and on and on and on. And unless we do something about it, and with the Dhamma, then it's going to go on and on and on. And Lama Tsongkhapa's verse about the wish-granting gem, that the human rebirth is actually worth more than a wish-granting gem. So what is a wish-granting gem? It's something that could fulfill all of our perhaps material needs, anything we want. If it would just appear before us, we could have it. And yet, that doesn't have any lasting essence. Anything, even if we get what we want, if we get whatever we want, still that doesn't really fulfill our needs in terms of beyond this lifetime. And so that's why the human rebirth, which can be used for Dhamma practice, is actually worth more than a wish-granting gem, if we use it wisely, if we use it properly. So how do we use it wisely? That's Sila Samadhi Panya. That's what we study when we come to the Dhamma. Sila Samadhi Panya. That's really all we need to remember. Virtue, meditation or concentration, wisdom, discernment. We might meditate a lot, but I'd like to emphasize the quality of discernment, actually, because the way, in particular, the way the monastic life is formulated, but also we tend to live like this in the monasteries. If we just cultivate meditation, we might have that inclination like, well, it'd be better if I could just be a hermit and meditate all the time. Maybe grow a little plot of land and just eat carrots or something and never see anybody. And then I would be happier than having to see all these people that irritate me all the time. Not that all of you irritate me, but I wouldn't have to be around all these people. And could just be on my own, and then I would be happy. I could be in samadhi all day. The alms round, or the way we're alms mendicants, and Luang Por Liam would talk about this, that is sense contact, the fountainhead of wisdom, is the sense contact, the fountainhead of discernment, is that it gives us that sense contact. So in a way, we're actually testing ourselves every day. We allow some sense contact in. We might go back to our dwelling place and sit and meditate or do walking meditation, and there's very little sense contact. We don't have to really deal with much except for our own minds, which is actually a lot already. But having to come down and do the daily activities of life, just eating, looking after ourselves, speaking with others, organizing things, then that's the sense contact. And so the wisdom, the quality of discernment or panya, then that is, we can see that that's present when the sense contact doesn't throw us off as much. So if we have the meditation, but without the discernment, then the moment there's sense contact, we might just feel totally like vulnerable or just really unsettled by it. We might be developing very refined sense of attention in our meditation, but then the moment the slightest unpleasant thing happens to us, we're just totally obliterated by it. And so that's where the discernment comes in. The discernment gives us that foundation where whatever comes in, when we let things in, when we let the sense contact in, then whatever happens, it doesn't throw us off, it doesn't obliterate us, and we're able to withstand that sense contact and reflect on it. So the discernment, the quality of discernment, and there's no real formula for it. You know, you can Like if you could listen to what I'm saying right now and you could be taking notes about it, but those notes won't even be relevant tomorrow. Tomorrow you'll need different notes. So the notes, we need to actually take note that the notes aren't going to be relevant in different situations. There's not some sort of formula where we can say, oh, it's going to be like this every time. But discernment, or we talk about letting go. Letting go is skillful response to situations. Discernment is a skillful response to situations, and we respond in a way that wholesome qualities increase and unwholesome qualities decrease. And we learn that over time. So we learn that, say, reacting with anger, it causes suffering every time, it burns us every time. That's something we can start to see with discernment, but it also takes mindfulness. So we say sati panya. The Kruba Ajahns are always using this phrase, sati panya, the mindfulness and discernment. So we have to actually see clearly how anger burns us every time, and it doesn't burn anybody else except us. Sometimes it burns others as well, but mostly it burns us when we react to a situation with anger. And so with satipanya, then we actually acknowledge that, and the heart starts to see it more clearly, and then it happens less and less. As the Dhamma grows stronger, these things happen less and less. Sila Samadhi Panya. There's the Dhamma quote from Longpo Ban that I read the other day that goes something like, Sila Samadhi Panya, it is the path and it is the way. Where does this path, where does this way lead? It leads to seeing the mind clearly. The mind seen clearly is clean. The mind seen clearly is clean. That's a very profound phrase. The mind seen clearly is clean. When it's not seen clearly, it's dirty. But when it's seen clearly, it's clean. So that's an interesting Dhamma point or Dhamma perspective that, and coming back to mindfulness, that ignorance or delusion can only be present, is dependent on that sense of non-seeing. But so there's no, in a way, there's no seeing of ignorance, there's no seeing of delusion, because when full seeing is present, it's not there, it's gone. Ignorance and delusion is not seeing itself. It is the not seeing. It is the unseen. So when there's nothing unseen, then it's not present. So that's, we get that phrase that mindfulness is the path to the deathless. So that clear seeing. So the mind seen clearly is clean. It possesses brightness, uprightness, and malleability. And when the mind possesses brightness, uprightness, and malleability, the mind is said to have Dhamma, for it has been well trained by Sila, Samadhi, and Panya. And when the mind is well trained for a long time and well tempered for a long time by Dhamma, the mind is said to be liberated. And the state of final release appears. So that's a very, in Thai, that was kind of hard to translate. He talks about the vimutti tam, the vimutti Dhamma, or the state of liberation. It's a vimutti tam prakotma, like the vimutti Dhamma, the final release manifests or appears. It's good to keep in mind. So when we're talking about extracting some sort of essence from our life, that's the Sila Samadhi Panya culminating in final release, and that's good to keep in mind. And no matter how long it takes, and it's normal to want quick results. But if it was quick results, we would have all done this a long time ago. Or if the Buddha could have enlightened us by touching us on the head, he would have done it a long time ago. So we have to do this work. for ourselves. That's both the unfortunate and the fortunate aspect of the practice. It's unfortunate. I wish I could just buy liberation, or I wish I could just order it on, click buy on liberation. And that would be so easy. But the fortunate aspect, or the empowering part, is that we can do something about it. We actually are free to practice. We actually are free to do something about it and listen to the teachings and put them into practice and do what we can within our particular situation, our particular energy level or age. Come what may, we do what we can based on our situation, a particular situation. That phrase that the Buddha has given us so much that is wholesome and help us to relinquish so much that's unwholesome. The Buddha is such a profoundly interesting character, having had this ministry of attaining enlightenment, having a teaching ministry of 45 years, thousands upon thousands of monastic and lay disciples. And yet the Buddha himself, he was a loner. He was a very private person, and he didn't incline toward being around people. There's even a sutta where he says when the Buddha is talking or meeting with people, his mind is always inclining toward dismissing them. His mind is inclining to seclusion. And it gives kind of an insight into the Buddha as a human being, as a person, that he inclined towards seclusion. And yet he was this great teacher and immeasurable compassion for the world, and yet his mind inclined to being alone, to seclusion, to emptiness. That's the way of Buddhas. So you didn't just sort of hang out with the Buddha. Like the Buddha didn't hang out with people. Like he wasn't like, hey, let's go hang out. Like that's kind of a strange word, actually, hang out. Like it's like laundry, like hanging out. It's just sort of hanging on a line, just sort of like this image of just hanging. How's it hanging? Language is funny. People are funny. So the Buddha, it paints a picture of the Buddha in the suttas. This is Buddha Nusati. When the Buddha's having the meal, he's at a meal dana, where he goes and has the meal at either the king's palace or somebody's home who wants to offer him the meal. So he has the meal, and then he asks if anybody has any questions, or he gives a Dhamma talk, or both. But then afterwards, he simply gets up and walks away, and he gets up and leaves. Having finished the talk or having finished the Q&A, he gets up and leaves. And so it's not this big, drawn-out affair, not usually anyway. I can even think for myself how when I was, say, like young, or when I was in high school, I never would have thought that I would have actually been able to develop a sense of ease and well-being in my life. Like, forget about enlightenment. I just didn't even, never imagined I would even be able to be even slightly happy. It's just so amazing. And it's only discovering the Buddha's teaching and discovering these precious teachings and how to actually use the human rebirth in a good way that I'm actually able to do at least some good things with my own life. So this is, it's a very good, precious opportunity. And just the fact that we can train ourselves is already totally amazing. And the fact that we can actually change our habits and modify our behavior of body, speech, and mind, which is what Dhamma practice is. That's the very definition of Dhamma practice, is modifying our behavior of body, speech, and mind so that it becomes more wholesome, less unwholesome. And it's to our great benefit, great fruit, great benefit for ourselves and for others, because when we benefit ourselves in this way, then it goes out. It goes out naturally to others. It almost seems like another life. It's hard to believe just how stuck in suffering I was when I was younger, and how, because of not being exposed to the Buddha's teachings, but it's just like stumbling around in the dark. It's like Master Xuan Hua would use the phrase, like going about as if drunk in a dream. So not just drunk and not just dreaming, but drunk in a dream. So it's like double delusion. It's a delusion squared. And immense suffering. And then we're always trying, if we don't really have some sort of guidance from the Buddha's teaching, or we don't have Sila Samadhi Panya, then it's like looking for a way out. And everybody in the world, without exception, every being in the world without exception is looking for a way out of suffering. Every being in the world wants to be happy and wants to avoid suffering. And so every being in the world is striving for that. But because most of the time it's guided by delusion, it's a misguided sense of trying to get out of suffering. So we try to get out of suffering through getting the next hit of sensuality or whatever, or having a good plan. And so it's coming, through the becoming. And then the sufferings of aging and death hit us when we least expect them, and we haven't contemplated them, and so then we suffer immensely. So we have these, but if we're armed with these contemplations about aging and death, and then we're really in a good position to deal with them as they arise. If we don't contemplate things like aging, how many people do you know who get to their 50s and 60s and suddenly it's like, my mom working in the hospital, she said she had this friend who in Hawaii was a triathlon runner and super good shape. These guys are in like really awesome shape and get to be 60 and incredibly depressed, and it's like the body starts to break down, and this person getting incredibly depressed, and it's like the happiness was dependent on that, having that strength of the body. And so if we contemplate aging, we prepare ourselves for that. We prepare our mind for that so we don't suffer so immensely when it does happen. And it will happen if we don't have some sort of serious accident happen to us first, then old age will eventually happen. And good thing it doesn't happen all at once. If we were to wake up and be, I don't know if I could handle it. If I woke up tomorrow morning and I was 80, what would happen? What would happen to my mind if that actually happened? So we use these Dhamma contemplations to try to be very realistic in our outlook, and they really do help us. It's nice that there was a bit of rain this evening, cooling everything off. Sometimes we can also use our environment around us for the practice of Dhamma and helping to make the mind a bit more peaceful. And we really need a lot to try to help ourselves to be more peaceful and at ease, and not just using the breath meditation, but trying to use our environment and also supporting each other and looking after each other to develop a sense of ease and well-being, and not being too intense with ourselves, not being too hard on ourselves, being compassionate with ourselves, but not being overly compassionate with ourselves to the point of being lazy, which actually isn't compassionate to ourselves, because the mind will get muddled and it'll get a bit more dark and won't be as clear. So finding what's just right, like Luang Pa talking the other night about what's just right, Dhamma practice, finding what's just right. And not being afraid to be totally ordinary, also just being, we don't have to, it's to be expected that we're going to want to do some spiritual athleticism in our practice, and that's fine. But also not being afraid to just be ordinary and not having to do anything special, just following the daily schedule. And when I first came here, I was so taken with the place, and I had been reading Milarepa, who was this ultra ascetic, and he lived as a hermit and in a cave, and was famous for eating nettles, just eating nettles, to the point where his body turned green. And people who saw him from a distance said he looked like a caterpillar, and with green skin and green hairs coming out of his body from eating too many nettles, and very emaciated. And I was really inspired by that, so I wanted to do that as well. And it sounds kind of strange, but trying to be very austere with eating and getting thinner and thinner, and then Luang Por finally saying, well, it'd probably be okay to eat more. And this idea, like the more ascetic, the better. But I was also in this state of immense gratitude for that this place existed. It's kind of amazing that finding a place like this and finding a community like this, and now actually having been in the brown robes for 20 years, actually being in a leadership position, never would have thought. When I was in high school, biting my nails until they were bleeding because I was so nervous all the time. It's like, never would have thought. Haven't done that for over 20 years. It's like, so we can change our habits. These things really can. These things really can change. The moment I decided to ordain, I'd never bit my nails again. It's like that sense of purpose arising, and then that moving in a different direction. But these things are all very, very human. I was speaking with this very senior monk, Ajahn Ñāṇiko. He's the abbot of Santa Chittarama in Italy. Was doing a FaceTime call with him a few days ago, and it's the first time I've spoken with him one-on-one in terms of like a conversation, but it's nice to just make connections with the different abbots of these different monasteries. And Ajahn Ñāṇiko is very, very tall, and I asked him if he'd ever met Luang Por Chah, because I always like to get these stories people have, like personal anecdotes of Luang Por Chah. And he said yes, in England. He was in England as a layman. He'd been studying molecular biology or something, and was in university. And when in 1979, 43 years ago, when Luang Por Chah first visited England, and he said he went to some venue where Luang Por Chah was going to be giving a teaching, and they were going to be able to pay respects to Luang Por Chah. And I was asking, what were your impressions of Luang Por Chah when you met him in person? And he said, well, my first interaction with Luang Por Chah was, he said, I'm extremely tall, as you know, and Luang Por Chah is extremely short. And he said Luang Por Chah was tired from traveling, but he said Luang Por Chah slowly walked in. He was using a cane, and Ajahn Pabakaro was there with him as his attendant, as his upatak. And he said Luang Por Chah walked in, and then he stopped next to Ajahn Ñāṇiko, who was a layman at the time, and he turned and he went and just looked up. The way he painted the picture was so kind of funny, and then just like didn't say anything. He was just looking up and then kind of walked on. This is twice his height. He said he felt so much kind of metta coming off of Luang Por Chah, and didn't even really. And he said that's all he remembered. He didn't remember the teaching. That's the only thing he remembered from that day. But, quite wonderful. So that's metta kammatthana. That's Just sometimes it's the wordless teaching that is the most powerful. I kind of had an experience like that too with Luang Por Liam, where it was when he visited here in 2015. It was when he first brought Ajahn Sek here to see if Ajahn Sek wanted to live here, and he was gonna go back to Thailand, and so I got to travel with him. We stayed at Niu's house in San Francisco, and we were going to stay the night there and then send Luang Por off. It was Luang Por Liam, Ajahn Sek, Ajahn Tanio. We were going to send them off, see them off the next day. So I remember that evening up in the room with Luang Por Liam, and we were giving a foot massage. There's 3 or 4 of us, and we were all giving a massage to Luang Por Liam, and he was asleep. He was on his back and he was asleep, but just radiating metta. It was so powerful. He was I think he was even snoring, and we were just massaging, and it was just like you feel so good, and it's like he didn't have to do anything. It was just radiating, and it's so powerful. That really leaves an impression on the mind. Never forget that. So it's nice to experience things like that and receive things like that. What if we were in a state where we could actually do that with Sila Samadhi Panya? Somebody like Luang Por Liam, the parami just speaks for itself. He doesn't have to consciously direct it. It's just there, and it's just very powerful. So it's wonderful that we're all here with this opportunity to practice with each other for the winter retreat, and it's good to acknowledge that opportunity and see that it is a rare opportunity, and it's a very temporary opportunity, so to make good use of it while we have it. We'll leave that there for this evening.